1986. Bernice Jackson interviewing George Wood in Woodward, Oklahoma. Mr. Wood, where were you born and when?
March the 3rd, 1921 at Sharon, Oklahoma.
And who was your father? What was his name?
His name was Sam Wood.
And do you know anything about his background, his father?
Well, he came from Georgia and settled west of Sharon down there on some property. Lived in a dugout. I heard him talk about that. And had several children. I don't remember just how many. And my dad was the youngest of the children.
Mm-hmm. And what was your mother's name?
Her maiden name was Zula Gilbert. And they lived just north of Sharon, about 3 miles. Her dad and mother's name he was Frank Gilbert, and his wife's name was Zula. Zula May, I believe, and my mother was named after her. She was the first of, I think it was 6 children, and as far as I know, they lived just north of Sharon, practically all of them until she was married.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you remember your little tasks that you were supposed to do on the farm when you were growing up?
No, I really don't. We lived in the oil fields down around Slick, Merrimack.
Oh, you didn't live on the farm?
Well, we weren't on the farm. I remember, I think we were when I was real baby, a small baby, but the first recollections I can remember is gasoline plant around Slick there. Dad was, I think they called him a pumper. Pumped the wells there, and
Well, you surely had jobs around the house to help your mother, or?
Well, that's a good question. I can't really remember too many jobs because my mother passed away when I was just 6 years old, and I can remember some of the mischief we used to get into, my sister and I, but most of the time, I think Mother just kind of put us out to play, and she took care of the house and took care of the baby. And
she probably didn't feel like being too rough on the older ones.
No, not at that time, anyway.
Okay, and do you remember your first school?
Yes, I do. It was just before Mother passed away. Went to school. About the only thing I can really remember about it is I remember the teacher. I thought she was real nice, and she made a remark about coffee. I think it was almost first week of school, and she said coffee would make you nervous. And prior to that time, I'd always had about a half a cup of coffee with a lot of milk and stuff in it with Mother and Dad for breakfast, and the next morning I pushed it back and wouldn't have it, and I still don't drink coffee to this day.
Well, that was good. I drank coffee and I had to quit. Okay, and do you remember your teacher's name?
No, I don't remember her name.
Mm-hmm. Where was this that you went to school?
At Slick.
At Slick?
Slick. Little town called Slick.
Is it still in existence?
I don't think. Well, I think it is too. I'm not sure. I haven't been by there for a long time. So
And where was it located?
Around Sapulpa, another little town of Merrimack, and Yale, down in that area someplace, close, not too far from Tulsa.
Did you continue with your elementary school at the same place?
No. After Mother passed away, Dad moved back up here to Woodward.
Oh.
And I started, in fact, I didn't go to school the rest of that year. I only went about 3 or 4 weeks that first year. Came up here and went to school at Sharon, and they were kind of good to me and let me make the first 2 grades in 1 year. So I got caught back up to where I was supposed to be in school.
That's good. And then you graduated from high school here at Sharon.
Yeah, in Sharon, yes.
Can you remember any particular thing in your school that you've enjoyed very much?
Oh yes, I enjoy. In fact, I like school. I enjoyed it. I wasn't a real outstanding student, but I made good grades. And one of the things I can remember is when in the 8th grade, when we graduated out of the 8th grade, going to high school, I got to be, or at least I was chosen, the outstanding boy of a grade school at that time.
Well,
and I thought that was pretty good. But,
that was quite an honor.
And we used to have ciphering matches quite a bit, and I could beat most of the kids in ciphering.
And spelling matches. Did you?
Yes, but I wasn't so good in spelling.
Oh, you weren't?
No, I'm still not very good at spelling, but when it come to ciphering, I was pretty good. Then, we had a pretty good basketball team. I didn't ever make the first team while there, but sports was quite good. But I can remember a professor, Professor Floyd Newberry. He's passed away now. But I saw one of my other teachers that I had in high school while I was there, Gordon Mott. He was here. He was out at the Senior Citizens the other day.
Oh, he was?
Yeah. And he was our math teacher and science teacher and basketball coach.
Does this Mr. Mount live in Sharon?
No, he lives out west of town here now.
Oh, he does. Okay, and you didn't play football?
No, we didn't have a football team.
How big a place is Sharon, or was at that time?
Oh, I'd say around 300.
At that time?
Yes. It had a pretty good trade territory. And, at that time, they had 2 grocery stores and a produce house and 2 filling stations, a couple of garages, hotel, post office. The Katy Railroad went through there, a depot, 3 churches, and newspaper. Let's see, barbershop, hardware. It was, and it had what they call Trades Day practically every Saturday. It was quite interesting.
People would come in on Saturday.
Spend all day.
Yes. Have a good time.
Have a good time.
What did your father do when he moved to Sharon?
Drove a school bus for several years, and then the first grader patrol for the county. I think he was the first man to operate it. in, I believe that's District 2 down there, if I remember right.
And he just, whatever work he could get then. Did
Well,
he ever marry again?
Yes, yes, he married again. 6 months after Virginia and I were married, he married Virginia's mother. And they lived here in Woodward until, well, she's still living here in Woodward now, but he was killed in the tornado that hit Woodward in 1947.
Were you living here in Woodward at that time?
Yes, we were. Well, they had a triplex apartment there. They lived in the east apartment. We lived in the west, and somebody else lived in the middle. I don't remember who now. And we had gone to church that night. In fact, I had sold my car. I'd sold it that morning, and we went to church with some friends that night. And when the tornado hit, well, in fact, we had left our children, two children with a little girl, at home. And after the storm hit, well, Virginia really was anxious about her children, so the fellow that we went to church with that night, he said, well, come on, I'll take you home. I know you're anxious about your kid. And we was at the First Baptist Church at 10th and Oklahoma, and we started up to Oklahoma, and trees and everything was in the road, and less than a block. That's as far as he could go. So we walked the rest of the way up there. And the time we got up there,
Now, where is this?
up to 17th and Main.
That's where you're.
That's where we lived.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got there, somebody had already got our children out of the house. There was a car was stopped right out on Main Street. Trees had fallen on both sides of their car, and they couldn't move, so they just sat there until it was over. And they got out, and they heard these kids crying, and so they went over and dug them out. Mm-hmm. In fact, there was only 2 places in the house that they could have gotten and not to have got hurt. In fact, they didn't even have a scratch on them, and the house was completely demolished. Beforehand, my son, if it got up a storm or anything, he'd run and get underneath his baby bed. So that's where the 2 kids and this little young lady was underneath this baby bed when it happened. And it was a oak baby bed. Walls had fallen in on top of it, but they weren't even scratched to it.
Oh, wow.
And
Wonderful.
good Lord just taking care of them very
Yes.
much. And,
Mm-hmm.
But on the other end of the apartment, the folks had talked about that night of going to Sharon, to lodge meeting or some kind of a meeting that they were going to have. And so I didn't even think about looking for them. I just figured that they were gone. And then a little later, I looked around behind the house and saw under some debris that the car was still there. So I went to hollering for them, and they were underneath all that debris. And what had happened when the storm had struck, Dad went to the door to hold the door from blowing open, and he called for Mother to come and help him hold the door. And about that time, the roof went off, and it fell in on them. And when we found him, he was in her arms, and he was dead, and she was bruised quite badly. But I guess they were under there probably a couple of hours before we got them out.
Well, what else can you tell me about the tornado?
Well, the tornado started down about Glacier and just Glacier and back up to Higgins and I think just south of Shattuck, Gage, Fargo, and then it hit Woodward, and there was 130 some people killed in that storm here, and a lot of miraculous things happened during that storm of how people were saved, from the storm, and there were just a lot of them that just killed. Now, what killed Dad, we don't really know. The only thing that I could see when we got him out, he had a little bit of blood on his temple. I believe it's his right temple. And I've always thought that maybe he got hit there with a piece of glass or something. I don't know. But from all the northwest corner of Woodward was almost as white clean. Now, if it hadn't been for all the tragedy and heartaches and such like, the storm did Woodward a favor of cleaning all that out, and it's been built back, and it's a lovely city now. But there was a lot of things, and I think there was still a few people, 2 or 3. I don't know whether they ever did find their bodies or not.
Well, there was reports made, too, that a couple of girls disappeared. Had you heard that?
Well, no, I'm not familiar with that.
That somebody went to the old hospital down here and claimed a couple of girls as his, and he took them. Now, that story got out at the time. I've heard, and different ones I've interviewed have said that that was true.
Could be. I know that all the churches and the old hospital over there on 4th Street, they were just packed with people. A lot of people just hurt, and there for a long time, people would go, like to the basement of the church, especially our church down there. A lot of people would come there when the storm had come up.
Mm-hmm.
I know there for a long time, our kids, when the storm had come up, they'd just go into hysterics. And so where I was living, at that time we bought a place there, 13th in Kansas. So I built a cave on that place and fixed it so you could go right out of the house, right down into the cave. And come up storm, I just have the kids go down there and go to bed and forget about it. And they finally got over it all right. Remember one night, before we built this cave, there was one cave in that block, only one in several blocks around there. I woke up and I found out later it was a train coming in, but the way the light flashed back and forth across the sky, I thought another tornado was coming. It sounded like one. I mean, it was, when you first woke up and heard that.
Mm-hmm.
So I got the wife and the kids up, and we were clear to that cave over there before I realized that it was a train coming in. So we had a lot of sleepless nights there for quite a while.
I should think so. That would be quite a trauma to go through. What were you doing? What were you working at that time?
I worked for E.P. Williams Chevrolet all during that time.
Mm-hmm. Selling cars or mechanic?
Yeah. Well, I was selling cars. I started out in the parts department, service, and then ended up selling cars there.
Mm-hmm. And let's see, tell me again when you were born. I forgot.
March 3rd, 1921.
1921. Do you remember the Depression?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I remember the black clouds coming in, dust. I can remember our houses weren't built then as sturdy as they are now and closed.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember wake up in the morning, you could almost see the imprint of where that dust had come in and settled around you. And
You'd raise your head off the pillow and you could.
see where your head had been. That's right. You sure could.
Now, you were at Sharon at that time.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I know a lot of times several times come to Woodward, and one of those clouds would come in, and you just creep along going home because you couldn't see.
Mm-hmm.
There's been several times, just barely ahead of your radiator of your car is about all you could see.
Or you could watch the grader ditch.
Yeah, as long as you stay between the fences.
Yes. And you remember the Black Sunday, or did it get that dark at Sharon? April the 14th, 1935?
Well, I was there. I expect I don't, I mean, it just don't stand out in my mind about that,
Mm-hmm.
but there were so many days that you couldn't see the sun that I probably just took it as another day. I don't remember.
Well, this particular day started out beautiful, and then about 2 o'clock it just rolled in from the northwest.
Yeah.
You couldn't see your hand in
No.
front of your face where we lived.
Put wet cloths over your face so you could breathe.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the dirt really blew badly then at
Oh, you
Sharon.
did. Yeah, it did. I think maybe, I mean, a lot of the dirt blew right there, but most of it was rolled in from
Mm-hmm.
somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I think from the Texas Panhandle, where the dirt was the blackest, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, seemed like had fairly good crops. I know I helped Dad haul wheat during the summertime, during that period of time, and they weren't extra good like some of them are now, but they seem to have fairly good crops.
What do you remember the price of wheat at that time?
I can remember 17 cents wheat.
Bushel.
I had an uncle that lived east of Sharon several miles, and I think he contracted one of the elevators 1,000 bushel. It was either 15 or 17 cents.
That wouldn't be much money, would it?
Goodness, no. Not for a year's work. Oh, I don't remember how much he had that year. But
That probably didn't pay his expenses.
well, a nickel went a long ways then.
Yes.
Today, you can't buy anything hardly for a nickel. But
I remember when I was little, Mother and Daddy would go to town. They'd always bring us back a little sack of candy or then when the chewing gum came in, I'd always order gum.
mm-hmm.
And they were a nickel for 5 sticks.
Yeah.
But now,
What is it, 40 cents or something like
Something
that? Or
like
50,
that.
40, 50 cents.
Okay, World War II. Did you have to go?
I did, yes. When they come to the conclusion that nobody got deferred, that's when I had to go.
How old were you when you went?
Let's see, in 44. I'd been 23. I was 23.
Were you married yet?
Yes, married and had 2 children.
Well, I didn't think they took married men with children.
Well, that's what kept me from going first 3 years of the war.
Oh.
And I was working in a defense plant in Huntington Park, California, the Aluminum Company of America. And we were deferred up until the last of 43, I believe it was. And then they come out with a directive that all able-bodied men, no deferments.
Tell me about your work in the defense plant.
Well, I worked with the Aluminum Company of America. We built all kinds of airplane parts, small parts. We had the foundry, what we call the foundry, and the tube mill, and I forget what else, other types of plants that were there, but there was about 4 or 5 different plants all in one. And I worked in the timekeeping department, so I got acquainted with all of them, watching them work in all those. And it was quite interesting of how they made the molds and poured the hot molten aluminum in it, and then after it cooled, then they'd take the sand from around the mold, and then they'd send it through all their lines of grinding and polishing and milling and whatever they needed to do to the part to make it a finished product. And then they'd ship it out to the airplane factories, and they'd use it in the making of their airplane. And
it went to all of the different airplane
manufacturers, Boeing and all those different.
And then where did you go for your boot training?
I was called from there in California, and I transferred back here to Oklahoma to go into the service. And we left Oklahoma City and went to Little Rock, Arkansas. And we had our boot camp there, 17 weeks of boot camp.
Tell me about boot camp. How did you like it?
Well, as the general said when he brought us in, he said, "You fellas may be soft and tender, but when you go out here, you'll be hard and rough soldiers before we get through with you." And he was right, because when we ended up, we had walked 1,700 miles in 17 weeks and dug foxholes, and everywhere we went, we run, and what they called double time.
And with a pack on your back?
Most of the time it'd have a pack on our back.
What did it weigh?
Well, when we made our 17-mile force march, I think it weighed around 50-some pounds, our backpacks did. And I think we did it a little less than 4 hours, 17 miles, with a 50-pound pack on our back.
That was the Army.
Army, yes.
You were in the Army. Mm-hmm. Okay, and after you got to be a tough guy, where did you go?
Well, our first orders that they got was to send us to Europe over there. But that's when, just after the Battle of the Bulge and Hitler surrendered over there, then, or they thought he was getting ready to surrender, they changed our orders and sent us to the Pacific. So they give us a 2 weeks furlough and told us to report at Fort Ord, California. So the family and I went out there, and we were at Fort Ord for, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks, I guess. And then put us on a boat.
Did you have to live on base while you were at Fort Ord, or could you go home at night?
I stayed on the base. Yeah, we had some friends out there that Virginia and the kids stayed with, and because we had lived out there and
Yes.
knew quite a few people there, so when
Well, could you go home on weekends?
oh yes, yeah,
Visit your family?
yeah, and we'd get to go home several nights during the week. Not all of them, but most of them. And they were fairly liberal with that. They had the blackout and all that kind of stuff that you had to adhere to during that particular time. And while we were there, at that time, they had a scare of, they said it was a Japanese submarine that came down the coast up there. Now, whether he did or not, I've never did find out for sure, but they really did black out things for a couple of days, and it was quite interesting to see how the people reacted and so on.
And then where did you ship out to?
Well, they put us on a boat and changed, as I understand later, that they changed our orders 3 or 4 different times as to exactly where we was to go. We were just floated out there on the sea for about 3 months. Yeah, and we ended up on Leyte. Just after they had secured Leyte, we were there, and they give us some more training there on guerrilla warfare and how to survive the jungles and such like. And they give us some training on beachhead landings, because we were to clean up these islands back up towards Japan. So
When you were just sitting out on the ocean, weren't you afraid the Japs might locate you?
no, not personally. I wasn't afraid, because when I left the United States, I made a vow with God that if He'd protect me, I'd do whatever He'd want me to do when I got back. I said, and I've tried to keep that word. Fear in that realm never did enter my part. Now, there were some there. I seen fear in a lot of fellas while I was gone. But we spent a lot of our time reading the Bible and just visiting most of the time, because there wasn't much to do. We'd rotate KP and things like that on the ship, but other than that, well, there wasn't anything to do. Probably once a week is all, maybe twice a week is all that they'd let us take a shower. So an extra one like that, quite a treat.
Well, how did you do your laundry?
That's a good question. I don't really remember how I did my laundry. I know we did it, but
Did they have machines, or did you have to wash things?
well, we did it by hand all the time. I know when we was on Leyte, we'd go down to the creeks and even to the ocean and do our own washing.
Okay, let's get back to Leyte now and your training there.
Well, the training part was more an amphibious type training, where we'd get in small boats and land upon a beach and go through the motions of securing the beach and then taking the island. I don't remember the exact name that they used. I think I always call them Amtraks, that they would float out in the ocean, and then they just go over any kind of terrain when they come up to land. And I can remember a lot of the fellas just get deathly seasick, throw up, such like. One time on one of the occasions they were over the back part of the ship. I think there's 6 or 7 of the guys that just leaning over the back of the ship and feeding the fish out there with throwing up and such like. But after I got, when I first got on the boat, when we left San Francisco, I got a little bit sick to start with, but after that, I never did get any worse.
Describe Amtrak. What does one look like?
A small steel boat with caterpillar-type tracks on each side. And they used that to propel it along in the water, and it also propelled itself on land the same way. And they also had a little propeller out of the back end that they used too to help propel them along. And
how many men would it hold?
Oh, 30, I expect.
Well, it would be how long?
Oh, I'd say probably 20 to 25 foot long and probably 12, 13 feet wide. And then they had to have room in there for their motors and the other stuff. But around 20, 25 people is about all they would get in it. And when they land there, there'd just be hundreds of those kind of boats going into land. When we left Lady there, we made 3 beachheads in 5 days. And on 2 of them, there wasn't hardly any resistance at all on those. But the 3rd one, they said that the Special Forces people told us that we could probably do it in 3 days. And we were a month. They were a month taking the island. And it's the same island that the war correspondent Ernie Powell was killed on.
What was the name of that?
I.E. Shima. Just the letters I and E. Shima. S-H-I-M-A, I believe is what he spelled it. And on that one, we landed about 8 o'clock in the morning. And by 12 o'clock, I was back on the hospital boat. That's how much I got to see it. What had happened, we landed on the beach, and it was sandy, and then back about 25, 30 yards, there was a bank about 12, 15 feet high, which protected the fellows as they came in on with their landing craft. And we were there and regrouped, and they told us to move out. We were to take a little hill over there, and on this hill in fact, before we landed, the Air Force had literally bombed that whole island with sulfur bombs. It just looked like it burned practically everything off of the island. And they bombed that for 3 days, just night and day. And so they told us, well, you won't have hardly any resistance on that. But it didn't turn out that way. What they had done, they dug tunnels back into these hills and such like, and well, there wasn't no way in the world that you could bomb them out. We just have to go in and dig them out. And as after we had regrouped and told us to go up, just to take the island. That's what they wanted us to do. Our platoon company was all on they had a little road going up that just about wide enough for 2 cars to pass, just barely wide enough. Ditches on each side. And our company was right on this road going toward the center of the island. Machine gun up on this hill opened up, and so we jumped into these ditches and was protected there. So they had us pinned down, couldn't do anything. The commander called for a support group for tanks to come up. And when all these tanks were coming, they came right up this road, and we were laying in the ditches. And the tanks were almost wide enough that if they varied one way or another, they'd get into the ditches. And their tracks on these tanks, I've taken to be 24, 30 inches wide. And I looked up over my shoulder, and here was probably 12 inches of one of those tracks right over the top of my shoulder. So I jumped out of the ditch real quick, hollered at the guy ahead of me, and he hollered at the guy ahead of him to get out of the way because they didn't take chances on the machine gun other than being crushed.
Mm-hmm.
And the tank stopped just after he'd passed me there for some reason. And this machine gun up there opened fire on us. And we all jumped for the ditches, and I got everything in but my hand. And I got hit in the hand. And that's the reason that I was back on the hospital ship that morning.
Well, it wasn't too serious then.
No.
Could have been a lot worse.
A lot of the fellows that's that $1 million wound that you get that it gets you out of a lot of trouble. No, it just got my hand. In fact, right in the knuckle of my middle finger on my left hand.
Mm-hmm.
And doctors experimented with it quite a little bit while I was there.
How many days did that keep you from going back into service?
Well, I thought that they'd just probably cut it off and wrap it up and send me right back, but instead, the doctor that looked at it said, "I believe I can save that finger." He said it'll probably be stiff, which it is, but I said, "Well, Doc, do whatever you want to." And so this hospital ship went back to Saipan, and we were there in the hospital for a few days, and they operated on my hand once while I was there. Then they sent us back to Honolulu by plane, and I was in the hospital there on Honolulu for about a month and a half, I guess. And they operated on it 2 or 3 times while I was there. And then they shipped me back to the States.
Oh, you never did have to go back.
I didn't go back. But I did get to see, before I was wounded, the plans of what our company was to do in the invasion of Japan, if it came to that, which praise the Lord it didn't. We were to hit the island of Japan just north of Tokyo on quite a cliff there that we were to have to scale to get into it. And their estimate, conservative estimate, that 1 million men would lose their lives just on the invasion of Japan, in which I'm thankful that we used the atomic bomb to bring the end to that war.
You approve of that?
Yes, oh yes, definitely I did, because 1 million men, that's a lot of people, men to lose over.
Are you pleased with the agreements that we've made with Japan at the time, and the way that the thing has turned out?
Yes, I don't hardly see how they would have
done much different. I think we could take some lessons from what has happened. For example, the Japanese are a very precise people. When
They're perfectionists.
Yes, they are to a great. We found that out in dealing with them during the war, that when they set their mind to do something, they really go about it in a very definite way to accomplish what they want to. Take the automobile industry, for example. They have captured a good share of our market here in the United States. And a lot of people wonder why. Well, now just why? I had a car dealer tell me that, he called me by name and said, if I had to depend upon service for these cars that I sell, and it was a Japanese make, he said, I'd go out of business. He said, we just don't have any trouble with them whatsoever. I haven't heard a dealer say that about any American-made car. But the Americans have the same capability and everything to do the same if they would. And that's what we've got to do if we want to stay on top of this thing. So
We've got to bring
excellence back into
yes. And do you approve of the Japanese coming in here and buying up things like they're doing farms and ranches and iodine plants and so on?
Well, this is a good place for investment. And if they didn't do it, I don't know who would. And it's really a boost in one way to our own economy for them to do such like. And most of them are using American help.
Oh, they are.
Yeah, most of them are doing it. They have some Japanese in the top echelon, I guess, but most of the workers and such like are still American.
In California, the Japanese resents the fact that, let's see, didn't we move them back off the coast?
Oh yes, yeah.
Can you tell me about it?
I don't know too much about it, although I do know that they were resettled back. Some of them were good, loyal Americans as far as that's concerned. Yet, on the other hand, it's just like go talking about your own family or anything. There might be some bad ones in there, but you still
find good ones.
find some good ones too. But although they were maybe treated kind of badly in a way, but yet you got to look at it for protection, for more. What's best good for the most people?
Well, the sneak preview on Honolulu really put a distress in our minds of the Japanese.
Yes. The Oriental people think different than we do. I do know that. And when someone believes that they're going to get the best reward in the afterlife if they do such and such and such, well, that's what they believe. That's what they'll do. And when we think that we should preserve life and help life and love one another and all those sort of things, that's good. That's real good. Yet on the other hand, we've got to protect ourselves against outlaws, outlaw nations, and what have you.
That's right. What did you, when you came back then, did you come back to Oklahoma and get out of the service?
Yes. When I came back, the United Nations was just being formed in San Francisco, and we couldn't come through San Francisco. They sent us to Vancouver, Washington. And little side note there might enter somebody that we hadn't seen any real American girls all the time we were gone. Oh, there had been a few, but most of them were natives, and when you see them and then compare them to our ladies, is quite a difference. And we came in, and I just heard a lot of them say, which I thought at the same time, what beautiful, beautiful people these ladies are. Because they worked in the mess hall and such like, and serving us meals and stuff when we got back. It was real good. I was sent to, Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio, Texas. I was still in the hospitals all the time, coming back. And they were, I think they operated on my hand once again while I was there. And then they was going to give me the therapy and a few other things. But I happened to get my discharge before any of the therapy started. So on August the 31st, 1945, I was discharged from service. Came back to Woodward, Oklahoma, and we had an apartment where we were when the storm hit. But were working there in California, and our job was still waiting for us. So we decided that we'd go back to California. We left, I forget what day it was, but we took 3 days, I think, to go out to California. And we got out there, the first thing I did, I went back, got my job back, all ready to go. And we tried to find a place to live, and we tried for 3 days to find somewhere to live. Couldn't. And we went back to where we had lived before, and the apartments were all full and everything. So we called the folks that saved our apartment. We're coming home. So we've been in Woodward ever since. So
Let's go back to Lady. Is that where you come in contact with the natives?
in Lady?
Yes.
Yes.
Describe the people, the natives there, to me.
There's two classes of the natives there. There was I think it was a Catholic compound at one of the little towns there. And around the church, they had built their town. Like we would build our town around the square, town square. Well, this was around their church. And from this place, one night, the chaplain of our place brought in some of the young ladies to sing for us. And we had just seen just ordinary people there, which they were sort of dirty, unkempt. Their hairs weren't combed or anything like most ladies keep their hair and so on. But these ladies came in with nicely dressed, hairs were combed, and looked lovely. And they sang for us that night. Now, poverty was quite rampant there, and most of the kids was there at the mess hall to clean out your plate if you had anything left from your eating. And it was quite pitiful in a way.
Or did they clothe their children?
Very little, very little. But most of them had some clothing, yes.
And
But we would just call it rags.
yes. Well, I've always heard about the grass skirts. And did they?
Never saw one.
Never
Well,
saw one.
Not there.
Mhm.
No, they had some kind of cloth,
Mhm.
but
I wonder how they obtained this cloth to make their clothes. Did the Japs furnish it for them? Did they
no.
have mills or something
No,
on it?
I don't know. I know some of them would. I don't know how they sewed it or anything like that, but parachutes. They would get a hold of a parachute or something and use that.
Mm-hmm.
And where they get the other cloth, I don't have any idea.
Mm-hmm. Then the women were fully clothed by
Most of
the
the
men.
time, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What kind of houses did they live in, do you know?
Oh, these, I call them bamboo houses or something to that effect. They weren't kind of like grass shacks of some kind. That's what.
Just one big room.
Yes.
And round?
Most of them were.
Mm-hmm.
That I remember seeing. Where we were, we just didn't see very much of the natives.
You didn't
Really?
get back into the wilderness and not to...
Very. Just this one little town. It's the only one that I can really remember coming into. And it wasn't much of a town. It just sort of a place where there were a few shacks and this church out there in the middle. It was neat, fairly neat, seemed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see the difference where Christianity had been and where it wasn't over what the Japanese were doing to some of those people. See, the Japanese had conquered all those islands. They were on all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And we just hit the main ones as we went back, and they were still Japanese on all those other little islands.
I don't imagine the Japs were very kindly, treated them very kindly.
I don't think so. I don't think so. The Japanese themselves they distrust, especially Americans, very much, because they were told if we'd catch them, they'd be tormented and tortured and all that kind of stuff. So they'd rather die than to be taken captive. Now, we did capture a few, but most of them, these holes back into the hill and such like, they wouldn't come out. That's where the boys got to using the flamethrowers and throw hand grenades and things back in there. Because if you went on by and didn't do that to that cave, there might be one or two in there, and they'd come out and they'd shoot you in the back after you go by. In fact, some of the boys got shot that way. On our second island that we landed on, I remember wasn't in our company, it was another company, was making a survey of part of it, and they passed up this one place. And as soon as they went by, this Jap come out and shot one. Happened to shoot him right down in the back, and they were bringing him down out of the hills there on the stretcher. And well, they had to kill the Japanese because they wouldn't.
That's the only way you could stop the shooting.
That's right. That's the only way you can do it. That sounds brutal and merciless and all
But
that
in
kind of stuff,
war.
but it's war, and it's either you or him. And if you want to live, you got to do it. That's all there was to it.
Well, then the Japs had planned this invasion on Hawaii several years and had planned for this war because it took time to supply those caves.
Well, now see this. What I'm talking about is about 3 years after Pearl Harbor.
Oh.
See,
Mm-hmm.
Because Pearl Harbor, from a lot of things that I've read since then, that they found out before, they had planned it for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
And at that particular time, the Japanese envoy was in Washington talking peace and all that kind of stuff when they did that. So
They probably thought that was a good time because we were busy on the East Coast.
oh yeah. I don't know about this war and stuff. It's I think we should do all to prevent it, but we got to be prepared to defend ourselves. I think
What do you think the next war will be? What will it be like?
I don't think we can describe the next war, really. It's gonna. I think it'll be in the Middle East. The next war will be in the Middle East.
You don't think it'll be here in the United States?
I don't think so.
I hope not.
If the American people wake up to the fact of what's going on in our hemisphere over here and let the president take care of it like it should be taken care of, I don't think we've got anything to worry about. But if we let them get over right down here on our doorstep, then we can expect some trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there'd be anything that we can't take care of, but still, why let it get here?
That's right.
We let Cuba, and we should never have let Cuba get into the condition it's in.
No.
And if we let Nicaragua follow the same path of Cuba, just see of all the things that Cuba's done over in Africa, in other places, and the stuff that they're trying to do here in the United States, why we're just foolish if we let it happen. Now that's my thinking anyway.
Can you think of anything else that we haven't brought up?
Well, that's
Just about covered it?
about covered it here.
Well, I sure thank you for coming. I've enjoyed this. As I told Mr. Roof yesterday, I've never interviewed anybody yet, but I learned something.
That's right.
And I've learned quite a bit from your
Well,
experience.
I've been here in Woodward ever since.
Mm-hmm. Your children, I suppose, is growing, and
Yeah, they're grown, got a family of their own, boys in Phoenix, Arizona, and daughters down in a little town of Hyco in Texas, about 80 miles southwest of Fort Worth.
mm-hmm.
Got 4 grandsons and 1 granddaughter,
Mm-hmm.
and 1 grandson.
You didn't tell me your children's name.
David is my boy, and Carol's the daughter.
Mm-hmm. And what church do you go to?
I go to the First Baptist Church.
And your grandchildren now, about what are their ages?
Let's see, 22 down to 3.
Oh, you've got them all.
Yeah. The oldest is third year in college. Next one just graduated in high school. Next one will be a senior in high school. And then the other one will be, let's see, I believe sixth grade this next year. And the other one is a little girl, and she, I think, will go to kindergarten next year. So.
And are you working at anything now?
No, I'm retired.
You're retired.
Retired a year.
And your wife and you are spending your time visiting your grandchildren.
See, my wife passed away in '81.
Oh, I didn't know. I'm sorry.
Been taking care of her mother, and she's 88, be 89 in September.
Well,
She's about bedfast. And
she's not in a rest home.
no, she's at home. I have some ladies come in to help take care of her, and I usually take care of her at night. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a wonderful job for a son-in-law to do. I admire you for doing it. Well, I sure thank you.
Well, I appreciate
This has been a pleasure for me. And do I have your permission to send this tape to Oklahoma City and make a master tape of it? Put it in an air-conditioned vault so your grandchildren can go there 50 years from now and hear it?
Yes, you got my permission.
But this tape will go up here in the museum.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, thank you a lot.